The Department of Justice has launched a far-reaching offensive against international crime syndicates, targeting figures like Joseph De Luca, chief of a powerful mafia empire. Popularly known as the Black Hand, a term whose origins trace back to medieval Sicily, the Mafia has developed into an international organization of crime, extending its tentacles to all parts of the world, including northern Queensland. A powerful mafia group is active in Sydney, and whispers of mafia terrorism have been heard recently. In this series, beginning today and continuing throughout the week in the Daily Telegraph, ace New York crime reporter Ed Reid lifts the lid on mafia terror in the United States. Reid gives names, dates and places in trying to answer the riddle of the enormous secret strength of the dreaded organization. In the spring of the year 1915, 3 youths sat on a grassy slope of the broad Sicilian valley that runs down to Palermo and the sparkling sea. It was a warm day, and tiny flies buzzed in shimmering clouds at the height of a man's stomach. The men were Vito Giannola, John, his brother, and Alphonse Polisola. They watched a group of workers toiling in the fields at the center of the valley, which spread lushly out in the hazy sunlight. Beneath their careless concentration was a shadow of contempt as they gazed out from under the shade of a broad-leaved oak tree. The youths belonged to the class known in Italian and Sicilian colonies of America as the Green Ones, meaning those who live in the cultivated sections and villages of Sicily's Latifonda, where farming and herding are the principal occupations. All 3 were junior members of the Stoppagleria faction of the Mafia, and they were about to make a decision that would bathe the city of St. Louis, in America, in blood for 6 years. Vito was thick-bodied and slightly above average height. He had round, flabby arms and short, stubby fingers. His appearance was bovine, but he had a reputation for violence among his fellow villagers that caused all to give him a wide berth. Alphonse was a tall, slim man, with coal-black hair, serious features, and black, deadly eyes. John was short and fat. He had a jagged scar on his forehead. A stiletto bulged beneath his left armpit. He was used to trouble and was always ready for action. In the pockets of each jingled a few coins, all that was left of 100 lire they had extorted from a Palermo theatre owner the night before. They had faced him in the theatre's tiny office. "My friend," Vito complained, "we are poor. We need money. You are a rich man. 100 lire to you is nothing. Give it to us. Give us 100 lire. We will guard your theatre from harm. We will protect you from assassins." "But I am not rich," the theatre owner protested. "No one plots against me." "You are wrong," Vito said slowly. "We plot against you. Now give us the 100 lire, or I myself shall kill you. We will blow up your theatre. We will kill your wife, your children." It had been as simple as that. It would be equally simple later, in America, and Vito was saying glumly under the oak tree, "Things are too slow here. The older men have everything hogged. If we didn't turn part of our money over to them, it would mean a knife in the ribs." He paused and smiled in satisfaction as he watched his companions. They were nodding. "Now I have a letter here from a friend in America. Business is fine there," he says. "There are no older men to pay and plenty of easy fellows to get money from. They are green ones like us city folk from Palermo, Girgenti and Trapani. Do you remember that fellow who lived near the Low Market in Palermo? He's a rich man now. He's one we could collect from. I know where he is in America. He's in a place called St. Louis. We can go there and find him, if you want to." It had been as simple as that. Police records show that the money for the trip taken by the 3 mafiosi was obtained from a Palermo banker who was persuaded to underwrite their vacation at Stiletto Point. 3 days after their hillside conversation, they were in the steerage of a ship bound for America and St. Louis. The 3 gangsters separated in New York. John went to Chicago, Alphonse to Springfield, and Vito to St. Louis. Vito's record shows that he toiled honestly on a railroad for 3 years as he became acclimatized to his new country. Then he determined that, while one did things a little differently in America, extortion and blackmail was still extortion and blackmail. And a man died just as quickly in one country as another. He gathered a few Sicilians together in a band that became known to the police of St. Louis as the Green Ones. In the gang, which used motor cars instead of horses as in Sicily, were John and Alphonse, who had responded to a message from Vito which stated, "We can bring Little Italy under control." John had been supporting himself in Chicago by manufacturing bootleg liquor, and Alphonse was the leader of a small Black Hand gang in Springfield. Both men rushed to St. Louis, where the Mafia, which was mushrooming throughout America, had installed Vito as the principal donore. Alphonse became the gang's enforcer and sent out word in St. Louis' Little Italy that henceforth every item of food sold would be subject to a tax to be collected by the mafiosi. Bananas, for instance, were taxed 5 cents a bunch and bread 2 cents a loaf. Then in 1923, Vito went into the wholesale meat business and proceeded to sign up Italian butchers. Alphonse was sent out to line up the trade. One of the butchers was recalcitrant. The price was higher than he had been paying his regular distributor. Alphonse figured this did not make any difference, since the extra money was more or less insurance for continued good health. The butcher remained adamant, and Alphonse called Vito in. The Mafia chief went to see the man. He was introduced to the prospective client as Don Vito Giannola. Generally, this was sufficient to sign the customers on the dotted line. The foolish butcher continued to say no. "No orders for you," he told Vito. "No orders for me?" "You talk foolish," Vito replied. Alphonse and Vito stalked out. 2 days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, an automobile stopped at the curb beside a man who was walking slowly along the street. He was the butcher who had said, "No orders for you." It was a cool September night. There was no moon, and he never saw the men who rushed up to him. His body was tossed over a viaduct. Soon after this incident, however, the mafiosi discovered that bootlegging was the most profitable illegal venture in Missouri, and that non-mafia gangs already had control of most of the St. Louis territory. Dinty Colbeck and his Egan gang controlled the bootleg activities of St. Louis County, and the East Side was the only location left. John was sent into this location to establish cookers for the alcohol and to line up sources of supply. There was a transportation problem almost immediately. The alcohol had to be brought out safely for distribution in other states. Alphonse, who always carried 2 well-oiled 38s, solved this difficulty quickly. He forced honest Italian-American merchants to lend the Mafia their trucks. If they did not, they would die. It was as simple as that. The Mafia crowd established a monopoly on supplies sold to other bootleggers not connected with the Green Ones. Only one such individual refused to go along with the Mafia, or to be precise, Alphonse and his pistols. He operated his still in the district west of Kings Highway and south of Daggett Avenue, in a section known as The Hill. Alphonse made it crystal clear, "You will pay us for letting you run your still, or we will fix your clock," he told the man. "Go to hell," Alphonse was told by the brave bootlegger, who thought he had friends who would protect him. A few nights later, this man made the mistake of taking an automobile ride with 2 of those he thought were friends. They drove out near Columbia Avenue and 59th Street and stopped. One friend, who had in his pocket the sum of $300 paid to him by Alphonse, got out of the car. "Hey," he called inside to the bootlegger, "come out here and help me. I think we've got a flat." The unwary bootlegger got out, bent over the right rear tire, and his friend brought a tire iron down on his head. He fell, apparently stone dead. "Let's load him in the car and dump him," one of the assassins said. "We can't leave him here." "Now wait a minute," rejoined his companion. "This is a brand new car. I don't want blood in it. Let's take this tow rope and drag him over to that dump." It's only 2 blocks away." Accordingly, a hemp rope was looped around the recalcitrant. The violence continued at the viaduct near Columbia. The Mafia sported jewelry, women and real estate. Several West End apartment buildings were purchased by a syndicate formed by the Mafia crowd. The stock was sold to residents and merchants in the Italian sections of St. Louis. Most Italians considered the stock a poor investment, for few dividends were paid. The stock was usually thrown away or sold back to the syndicate at a fraction of its original cost. Vito was the flirt of the crowd. If he took a fancy to a young Italian girl, she took a fancy to him or else. One of Vito's amorous adventures, however, involved a married woman. Not even his close friends could understand why he was attracted. Vito simply went to this woman's husband and told him to get out of town. There were 3 small children and a lifetime to try to forget if the order was obeyed. The frightened man left town, and Vito moved in with his wife and children. The Mafia was and is powerful in St. Louis. By the spring of 1925, liquor operations in Madison County had assumed respectable proportions, with Vito, Alphonse, and John splitting about $100,000 a year. They maintained 150 fronts in St. Louis. These were soft drink establishments that sold whiskey, gin, and brandy made in Madison County in the stills of the Mafia. The turmoil of the early days of the United States crime syndicate, as reflected in St. Louis, was the same in every big city in the country. The mafiosi spared no pains and no imagination in doing away with their rivals. The Arnold Rothsteins, the Peg-Leg Lonegans, the Dutch Schultzes, and the Oni Maddens were all killed or driven out of control. The Irish gangs, the German gangs, and the men of other nationalities who stood up against the control of the Mafia all went by the board. The mafiosi unfurled their black flag over one city after the other. They were killed in turn, but others took their places. The establishment of the Mafia organization in St. Louis resulted in a grim roster of dead and injured men, women, and children. The impact of the secret organization is on the police records and remains as a warning. Police records yielded a list of 30 persons assassinated and 18 wounded in the bloody effort of the Giannola Polizzola gang to establish itself in St. Louis. They are typical Mafia victims of a typical Mafia-dominated town in the days that preceded the modern era. Nowadays, mafiosi do not kill their enemies with so much aplomb, if at all. There are other ways of getting rid of opposition, like greasing the palms of officials. Sometimes, the most extraordinary fiction is woven into the legend. Often, its credibility depends on the success achieved by persons connected with the final flowering of that legend in modern times. This is true of the secret society known as the Mafia. Now, legend is akin to fiction, but it is more closely related to truth, which is perhaps why the Mafia was mentioned at all by matter-of-fact members of the Kiefover Crime Investigating Committee as the cohesive element, which holds together the crime syndicate that earns $20 billion a year in the United States. In appearances before the committee, investigator after investigator testified that they had come across evidence of this secret organization, which seemed to rule the empire of crime with terror as its chief enforcement agency. They were not certain as to their exact nature. Some of them knew that recently, the government of the United States, most notably the Treasury Department, had become interested in the Mafia. Since 1945, this interest has grown. In that year, an important witness in a narcotics case was slain, and it was rumored that the Mafia was behind the killing. As federal agents, mostly narcotics men, dug into the ramifications of the Mafia and were rewarded with a few shiny glints of fact, their interest became almost frantic. At this writing, the Treasury Department is in possession of a list of more than 1,000 persons believed to be some known to be members of the secret organization. Most of them are residents of the United States and constitute a threat to the moral fiber of the country, a threat that has become increasingly evident in recent years. Linguists hired by the Treasury Department, which enforces the narcotics laws, are feverishly translating books which purport to explain the Mafia. They have discovered that the Mafia is the principal fount of crime in the world, controlling vice, gambling, the smuggling and sale of narcotics, and other sources of evil. It has become clear that the people of the Mafia are to be found at the heart of the recent major national scandals, which have shaken our people's confidence in their government and in the administration that speaks for it. Official after official in local, state, and national government has been linked to members of the Mafia, whose allegiance is pledged only to the super-government of crime, which has its capital in Sicily. The Mediterranean island of Sicily, centuries ago, gave to the world the monster known to history as the Mafia. It arose as resistance to foreign oppression and fed like a vampire on the blood of successive conquerors. Violence became its principal occupation. And after the labor of Mazzini, Cavour, Garibaldi, and Victor Emmanuel II united Italy, the Mafia, having no more foreign throats to cut, became a group of plain gangsters. Patriotism vanished from the aims of the Mafia. The mafiosi preyed on their own people, then on the world. One Mafia legend says the organization had its origin at Palermo in the Sicilian Vespers on March 29, 1282. Aided by Pedro III of Aragon, the Sicilians began a revolt against the French cruelty of the Angevins, who had been summoned by the popes to replace the Hohenstaufen dynasty, which had ruled Naples and Sicily. As the bronzy iron notes of Vespers were being rung in the brilliant spring sunshine, a wedding was taking place in the city of Palermo. A girl and her lover had gone alone to the church to be married, and the youth left his bride-to-be on the threshold while he went to call the priest. In his absence, a drunken French sergeant, Pierre Drouet, strode out of the shadow of a mouldering stone arch and dragged the terror-stricken girl to a nearby shelter, where he assaulted her. She tore away from his grasp and tripped, falling as her slipper caught in the coping of the slate pavement. Her skull was crushed against a sharp projection of the church wall. The returning youth threw himself upon Drouet. "Morte alla Francia!" the grief-stricken man cried. "Death to the French!" As news of the incident spread, thousands of maddened Sicilians took up the cry. Soon the shout became a slogan, "Morte alla Francia, Italia anela!" Death to the French is Italy's cry. For 72 hours, the French in Palermo were hunted down and slain. Then retribution came in the form of French soldiers, and the hunters became the hunted. Soon the Sicilians formed a secret organization to fight back, and its password was Mafia, made up of the initial letters of the words in the tragic death cry. For years, the society aided the poor and downtrodden, stretching out its hand as a savior to practically the whole population of Sicily. Then, as the unification of Italy isolated a Sicily that had known the grandeur, glory, and despair that only conquerors can bring to a nation, the mafiosi turned on their own people. Extortion, murder, and arson against all classes became the trinity of terror that ruled Sicily. During its rise to power in Sicily, the Mafia absorbed the Camorra, a secret society formed at Seville in the year 1417. It was transported to Sicily and adjacent states by the Bourbons, last of the foreign dynasties to control Sicily. The Camorra started, unlike the Mafia, as an organization of criminals who amicably divided the products of their robberies with the police and the clergy. The Bourbons tolerated the Camorra as the source of their assassins, much as the crime syndicate in the United States tolerated the troublemaking, murder-incorporated gang of Brooklyn hoodlums. Cervantes speaks of the Camorra in his exemplary novels. King Victor Emmanuel II made a desperate effort to eradicate the Camorra, and some arrests were made. Some unimportant people were sent to jail for various types of crimes, but this only resulted in the Camorra becoming active within the penitentiary system. In the 1907, after many murders of influential people in Naples, public sentiment rebelled. Huge numbers of arrests of Camorristi were made. Many fled to America and began to prey upon the Italian population there. In many cities, the Camorristi ran across the Mafia, and bloody feuds resulted. One of the most disastrous gang wars took place in New York City. After dozens of persons died, the public was aroused, and the two societies joined hands shortly after 1920. At a meeting in Atlantic City, the bond was cemented, and the foundation laid for the present syndicate, or combine, the surface of whose working operations was scratched by Senator Kefauver. The Mafia reached the apex of its power in Sicily in 1912, after universal suffrage was adopted. The poorer classes, with the power to vote, yielded to suggestions made by the mafiosi and supported their candidates. The nobility and wealthier classes joined the Mafia in self-protection. Better steady payments of tribute than sudden robbery. It was around the turn of the century that mass migrations of mafiosi took place, with the destination in most cases being America. Many mafiosi changed their ways upon entering their new lives in America. It is regrettable that not all changed their outlook on life, but it is a curious fact that the Mafia in America has an aristocracy that is, in many places, unconnected with the terror and law-breaking associated with the secret society. On the list of the Treasury Department are the names of top families whose connections with the secret society are rooted in Sicily. These families have a noble connotation among mafiosi. They are never in want, they are always provided for, and they lend an incomprehensible spiritual quality to the existence of the Mafia. Their names never appear on any police dossier, yet their addresses and telephone numbers have been found on people of the Mafia who have committed every crime under the sun. These people are the veritable gods of this strange criminal band, feasting off their votaries, who could not explain, if they tried, why all this is so. These families control most of the fruit and produce markets of the country. Most of the olive oil business in California is under their wing, and so is most of the tomato paste industry. In the files of the Treasury Department, there are innumerable dossiers on people who cannot be classified as criminals, but who play footsie almost every day with known members of the criminal Mafia element. A singular case in point is that of Joseph Profati of Brooklyn, a member of the Grand Council of the Mafia, and formerly one of the most respected members of his community. Profati was arrested when police raided a meeting of suspected Mafia leaders in Cleveland in 1928. A large number of pistols were seized from the 23 men arrested, and Cleveland Sicilians rushed to raise bail for them. With Profati, police seized Vincent Mangano, notorious gangster from the Brooklyn waterfront and top mafioso, and one Ignazio Red Italiano of Tampa, Florida, a narcotics smuggler now deceased. Police found 13 guns in the baggage of these men. They all carried considerable amounts of cash, ranging as high as $1,500. One was held as a refugee from a murder charge in New Jersey, and 5 of those arrested were members of the Frankie Yale gang of Brooklyn. One of the puzzling aspects of the affair, insofar as Profati's connection with it is concerned, is that on July 20th, 1948, 20 years after the Cleveland raid, his photographs and fingerprints were removed from Cleveland police files and destroyed. This was done at the request of a lawyer sent from New York. Profati was questioned by the Kefauver Committee at a closed hearing. At first, he asserted that he was in Cleveland in 1928 in connection with his olive oil business. Then, after admitting that he had no olive oil business in Cleveland before 1935 or 1936, he was unable to give a satisfactory explanation of his presence at the Cleveland Convention. Until the time of his exposure, hints about his past began dribbling out in Brooklyn in 1949. Profati was noted for his charities and religious work in Brooklyn, where he was in the forefront of Catholic Church activity. In the files of the Brooklyn Eagle is a photograph of Profati showing him surrounded by civic, social and religious leaders of the community, including several top judges. He was about to receive a papal decoration when a man close to District Attorney Miles McDonald exposed him. The initiation rites of the old mafia had a decidedly religious tinge and have probably not changed much over the years. The would-be mafioso is kept under keen observation for a long period of time. When consent is obtained from the chief, or don, of his particular district, the neophyte is taken to a room where a council of leaders is assembled. On the table in the room is displayed the paper image of a saint. He offers his right hand to two friends, and they draw enough blood to wet the effigy. On this image, the novice takes his oath, and then he burns the effigy in the candle's flame. From then on, he is a member, indissolubly tied to the association, and, as the newest member, is usually the first to be used when a murder is desired. The oath, according to secret files of the Treasury Department, reads as follows: I pledge my honor to be faithful to the Mafia, like the Mafia is faithful to me. As this saint and a few drops of my blood were burned, so will I give all my blood for the Mafia, when ashes and my blood return to their original status. He is then taught various means by which mafiosi communicate with one another when they are in a strange town and wish to make themselves known. A question is asked of a likely stranger. What time is it? If the stranger is a member of the clan, he answers, My watch is 30 minutes slow. Since when? Since the 25th day of March, the day of the Annunciation. Where were you on that day? I was at place where he was admitted to the society. Who was there? Lots of nice people. Whom do you adore? The Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. What is your card? Diamonds. A remy is the Sicilian word corresponding to diamonds in American playing cards. Actually, only the first few questions, or perhaps the last question, is asked of the stranger. But there must be enough right answers to establish the identity of the stranger as a true mafioso. Early in Sicilian history, when it was necessary to maintain extreme secrecy, the mafiosi were divided into groups of 10, with a group leader, or capo di diecina, chief of 10, at the head of each. This kept members from knowing too much about the association. The group leaders were known only to each other. They reported to provincial chiefs, and the chiefs reported to a supreme chief who resided, and still does, in Palermo. The organized criminals of the world, who are owned by the Mafia, have honored the code of Omertà since time immemorial. Omertà is a word of obscure genesis. Cesare Mori, head of Mussolini's police in Palermo, who pursued the Mafia for 2 decades, did not know its origin. He encountered its manifestations many times, to his frequent frustration. Omertà probably springs from the Latin word homo, man. In Sicily, and it is a purely Sicilian word, it should be spelled umiltà, meaning humility, a quality which every member of the Mafia has to display on the surface. It connotes manliness. Its primitive meaning was noble silence, a proud and staunch reserve, not to be confused with the meaning behind the proverb, silence is golden. In the beginning, it was not the silence of fear, but a symbolic rebellion against the common law, against injustice and tyranny, especially in Sicily, where the government had for centuries been the source of injustice and tyranny. Omertà, to the mafiosi, is also the feeling which manifests itself in the protection of criminals by others of their kind, or in the hero-worshipping non-criminals who admire a man who can take the law into his own hands and thwart justice. It was the code of Omertà, though he probably did not know the word, that closed the lips of the famous hoodlum Monk Eastman, who was shot in the stomach by members of a rival gang in New York in the year 1901. They told him at Gouverneur Hospital that he was dying, but Monk spat clean over the heads of his questioners to the opposite wall and refused to name those who had shot him. He did not die that time. It was the same code that sealed the lips of Frank Costello and other members of the Mafia-dominated United States crime syndicate, and laid them open to prosecution for contempt of Congress. A form of compulsory Omertà is inflicted upon people who have become involved with criminals through greed and are forced into compromises and arrangements. The original lofty meaning of the word has degenerated, but its principle remains simply this: talk and you die. Keep your mouth shut, and we will take care of you and your family. The Mafia and its worldwide criminal organization live and die by this code. Under it has grown and flourished a government of crime that is more powerful than any formally constituted government on earth, because it is immortal. A treasury of billions is at the disposal of members of the inner council of the Mafia, men who have come up through the ranks of crime. The high priests of the Mafia are, without exception, Sicilian or of Sicilian origin. Every continent on earth has a governing board of Mafia members who rule all organized criminals and dispense their own form of justice, which may take the form of a grant of money or a sentence of death. The power of the Mafia is not entirely in its wealth, but in its ability to kill anyone, anywhere, at any time. The ability of the Mafia to push the button marked vendetta and kill a man anywhere on earth has been demonstrated many times in the United States. The first such demonstration in New York City occurred in the year 1908, when Raffaele Palizzolo of Palermo disembarked from a ship swinging peacefully at anchor off the Bush docks in Brooklyn. Palizzolo was welcomed with open arms by the Sicilian population of Brooklyn, for he was, in addition to being a member of Parliament in the old country and rich and powerful, the king of the Mafia in Europe. He came to this country for a reason not immediately given. For a number of years, he had been under a cloud of suspicion for the murder, in February of 1893, of Baron Emanuele Notarbartolo, who that same year was elected president of the Sicilian Bar Association, and at once advocated a clean-up of grafters. He named Palizzolo as one of the grafters who was aided and abetted by the Mafia he headed. This was a mistake. Baron Notarbartolo's body, disfigured with 16 dagger wounds, was found in a lonely forest outside Palermo. In addition, a couple of his friends were killed. Palizzolo was arrested and prosecuted, but with apparently unlimited resources for his defense, $20,000 of which was raised in the United States. The case dragged on from court to court. After 3 trials, pressed by relatives of Notarbartolo and a change in political fortunes, Palizzolo was convicted and went into exile. 5 men fled to America during the various court hearings. They were witnesses who had given evidence against Palizzolo and had broken the traditional agreement never to bear witness against one's neighbor. Each of the 5 was lured to a lonely place in New York City and stabbed to death. The murders occurred after Palizzolo had given their names to the local Mafia chiefs and departed for Europe again, following a series of banquets and parades in his honor. One of the victims was Salvatore Marcine, who was found in a vacant lot in Flatbush. He was in 2 pieces, both wrapped in oilcloth. In the 14 months ending March 16, 1909, more than 40 homes in America belonging to relatives or friends of the unfortunate Palermo witnesses were bombed. 10 houses were completely demolished and 8 were set afire. Mussolini, in a speech to the Chamber of Deputies in Italy on May 26, 1927, during his so-called campaign to wipe out the Mafia, attempted to belittle the organization. His theory was that if you separate a bandit from his glamour, the people will lose faith in him. He placed Mafia suspects in huge cages and paraded them through Italy. "Gentlemen," the duty told the chambers, "it is time that I showed the Mafia up to you. But first of all, I want to divest this association of brigands of any kind of fascination or poetry to which it has not the least claim. Let nobody speak of the nobility or chivalry of the Mafia unless he really wishes to insult the whole of Italy." But Mussolini, who associated panoply with power, knew in his heart that taking a tiger's stripes away did not destroy its ability to kill. In reality, his drive on the Mafia served as a cloak to impose his will on the people and do away with his enemies. Denounced as mafiosi were many people of quality who had expressed hatred for and opposition to fascism. Later, after the great trials at Termini Imerese in Sicily in 1928 and 1929, as a result of which thousands of persons, mostly cattle thieves, were imprisoned, the Duce made the Mafia and its leaders virtual rulers of Italy. Perhaps he could not help himself, for the Mafia ruled the criminal element long before he came to power. One of his special favorites was the killer Vito Giannola, now Mafia boss of the United States, of whom we shall hear later. Members of the Mafia were used by Mussolini to foment unrest in Tunisia, French North Africa, which he coveted for Italy. The French Secret Service, in 1932, estimated that the Mafia ran enough guns into Tunisia to arm 30,000 of the 100,000 Italians in that country. The Mafia was used to bring into line Italians in Tunis who hated both the fascists and the Mafia and were frightened blue at the thought of coming under fascist rule again. Everywhere, through the centuries, the Mafia has become a parasite. First on the decent Italians, then on the communities where New World Italians had settled. It would perhaps be easier to conceive of the Mafia if one considered it as the religion of the criminal classes, the brain of a system of tentacles stretching around the world. In his study of the Mafia in Sicily, where Omerta exists perhaps in its purest form, Cesare Mori came to the conclusion that it was almost a spiritual expression, and that mafiosi from different districts needed no marks of recognition, that they knew each other by instinct. The baffled Mori came to believe that mafiosi rose of their own accord to power in the organization through some kind of suffusion that came from being long steeped in crime. He believed there were no rules for admission, no initiation, that when a candidate had all the qualifications, he was absorbed automatically into the organization and just as automatically expelled and done away with if he lost them. He was wrong on almost all counts. The American version of the Mafia seems to require induction ceremonies and secret signals. The qualities of the United States organization, which operates under orders from Palermo, make no mistake about that, depart from the Sicilian Italian-Mafia tradition, possibly because of the forced dilution with other peoples and other spiritual values. The high priest of the world Mafia, who rules in Palermo, is Pasquale Annea, alias Pasquale Sileo. He is about 75 years old and is going blind. Charles Lucky Luciano, the present high priest of Europe, holds Annea in the deepest and most complete reverence. Lucky was vastly disturbed by the arrest, late in 1951, on a narcotics charge in New York, of Annea's nephew, John Caneva, alias Spirandeo. Luciano is slated to take over the Mafia reins when Annea dies, unless the Sicilian rulers change present plans. It is probable that when Annea moves on, the code of Omerta will take a further spiritual loss. However, the Mafia's skillful functions will not suffer. It is almost impossible to fight an organization that, without the need of a herd of police, knows about every crime committed in its bailiwick, and every criminal as soon as he enters its arena. In the kangaroo courts of the Mafia, there are never any hung juries. No freeing of criminals because of insufficient evidence. When the Mafia liquidates a member, it has no anxiety about a mistake. Under the code of Omerta, a Mafia criminal, within Mafia circles, confesses in much the same manner as the good comrades of Soviet Russia. In Italy, the victim of a robbery can go to the Mafia and get his property back. But he must give 1/3 to the Mafia in return for its services. The American organization has operated in this manner many times in cases of jewel robberies and other similar crimes. Statistics kept privately by the Mafia Grand Council in the United States show failure in only 5% of cases brought before it. These are spontaneous crimes perpetrated by new criminals over which the Mafia has no control. There is one inflexible rule: From the moment the victims of criminals enter into negotiation with the malefactor through the offices of the Mafia, they are bound to silence where the legally constituted authorities are concerned, in the spirit of Omertà. This rule is so closely adhered to in Sicily that one man, who had appealed to both the authorities and the Mafia to recover a stolen horse, refused to admit the horse was his when the police found it in a raid on the corral of a thief in a nearby village. Police brought the horse by night to the owner's village and released it. At once the animal made its way to the home of its owner, followed by the police. The owner embraced his property fondly. The police stepped out of the dark. "Well?" they asked. "After all," said the unabashed man, "I have not claimed the horse. The horse has claimed me." In Italy, there is an adage which goes, "Kill a man in Sicily. If you are a Sicilian, the Mafia is with you." This is particularly true when Mafia leaders themselves differ. Generally in modern Sicily and America, when blows are exchanged, the boys get involved in a knife fight, and then a slight stab settles the quarrel. However, when the differences are graver, one of the quarreling parties, if he is from the old country or is in the old country, says, "Excuse me, friend, but you are right." This means that one of them must die, without mercy. In Palermo there is a story of two mafiosi who quarreled in this way. A shot fired at dusk ended the existence of one of them. His relatives were about to avenge the death when the assassin was arrested by the police. He was penniless and could not pay for a lawyer. The murdered man's family could very easily have brought the necessary evidence for his condemnation. Instead, Omertà prevailed, and the family not only produced evidence that the murderer was miles away at the time, but also hired a lawyer who defended him so well that he was acquitted. 5 days after the assassin was released, the murdered man's relatives killed him. It was a question of honor.